There are things that the earth keeps secret, buried so deep that not even the wind can carry them away. Mikey arrived in the town of Red Canyon one August afternoon as the sun was beating down on the earth with a force that seemed to want to crack it in half. His boots kicked up small clouds of red dust with each step, and sweat ran down his face, scarred by time and difficult decisions. He had come from far away, bringing only a worn-out leather suitcase and 50 cents in his pocket, all that was left of a life he had left behind. The city was small, the kind that grew up around a train station and never managed to expand beyond what was necessary. Wooden buildings lined up along the main street like crooked teeth in an old man's mouth. The salon, the grocery store, the blacksmith shop and the bank formed the heart of that place, forgotten by progress. Some houses were scattered along the sides, surrounded by gardens that fought against constant thirst. Mikey stopped in front of the bank, a two-story building that tried to look important with its white-painted windows and a gold plaque that shone in the inclement sun. He took a deep breath, feeling the hot air burn his lungs, and pushed open the heavy door. The interior was cooler, protected by the thick walls and curtains that filtered the brutal light from outside. Behind the counter, a thin man with small glasses looked up from his papers. His fingers were long and pale, like someone who had never held a tool heavier than a pen. Mikey approached slowly, her footsteps echoing on the waxed wooden floor. He took the 50 cents out of his pocket and placed them on the counter with a soft, metallic sound. The bank manager looked at the coins and then at the man in front of him, an expression of curiosity mixed with skepticism rising on his face. During the minutes that followed, words were exchanged in low tones. Papers were examined, stamps applied, and signatures collected. When Mikey left the bank, he carried with him a deed yellowed by time and a rusty key. He had become the owner of the Murphy Ranch, a place that had remained empty for more than 10 years. The sun was beginning to go down when he finally arrived at his new home. The ranch was 3 miles from town, tucked away in a valley surrounded by low hills covered with dry brush. The main house was a simple structure of wood and stone, with a porch that stretched across the front and a brick chimney that rose like a finger pointed to the cloudless sky. The windows were covered with boards nailed to the inside, and the front door hung from its hinges like a half-open mouth. The paint had peeled off long ago, leaving the wood exposed to the elements. Cobwebs decorated the corners of the porch, and small animals had nested under the entrance steps. Mikey walked slowly around the property, her trained eyes assessing every detail. There was a stable that still looked solid, despite the door that swayed in the wind. A stone pit rose in the center of the courtyard, with a rusty pulley that creaked softly. Further on, the remains of a fence demarcated what had once been a pasture. When darkness began to spread through the valley, he decided to explore the interior of the house. The key turned with difficulty in the lock, and the door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty interior. The smell that greeted him was a mixture of mold, dust, and something else, something he couldn't identify, but that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He lit a match, and the flickering flame revealed a main room, with furniture covered in white sheets that looked like ghosts in the dark. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with cold ashes scattered across the floor in front of it. Pictures hanging on the walls showed faces that time had faded into just shadows of people who once lived there. Mikey spent the rest of the night exploring each room, lighting match after match to light her way. In the kitchen, he found dishes still arranged on the table, as if the Murphy family had just gone out for a quick walk. In the master bedroom, clothes still hanging in the closet exuded the ghostly smell of lavender and wasted time. It was in the attic that he found the first sign that something wasn't right. Among dusty trunks and forgotten farming tools, there was a pile of yellowed newspapers. The headlines spoke of a devastating drought that had hit the region 10 years earlier, of abandoned farms and entire families that had disappeared overnight. But it was the last headline that made Mikey stop breathing for a moment. Murphy Ranch, the curse no farmer dares to mention. The article was torn, and only the first few lines were legible. Local authorities continue to investigate the strange disappearance of the Murphy family. Neighbors report strange lights and unexplained sounds coming from the property during the nights leading up to the rest of the text had been eroded by time and humidity. Mikey carefully folded the newspaper and put it in her shirt pocket. Outside, the wind had intensified, making the house groan and sigh like a wounded animal. He walked down the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath his feet, and decided that he would explore the rest of the property when the sun rose again. That first night at the Murphy Ranch, Mikey slept on the floor of the main room, using her suitcase as a pillow. But the sleep that came was restless, full of fragmented dreams where voices whispered his name through the walls and shadows moved in the corners of his vision. And when the first ray of sunlight filtered through the cracks of the boards nailed to the windows, he woke up with the absolute certainty that he was not alone in that place, forgotten by time. Dawn came slowly to the valley, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that spread over the hills like spilled blood. Mikey woke up with her body aching from the hard floor and a strange feeling that she had been watched all night. He stood up slowly, rubbing his stiff neck, and walked to one of the board-covered windows. Through a crack between the woods, he watched the ranch patio in the soft morning light. Everything seemed different now, less threatening than in the darkness of the night before. The shadows had retreated, and the sounds that had kept him awake revealed themselves only as the wind, passing through the ancient structures and the small animals that had made the abandoned ranch their home. Mikey decided that her first task would be to make the house habitable. He found a rusty hammer in the stable and began to tear the planks out of the windows, one by one. With each plank removed, more light entered the house, revealing details that the darkness had hidden. The furniture was in better shape than he had imagined, only covered in a thick layer of dust that danced in the air whenever he moved anything. In the kitchen, he found that the well still provided clean, fresh water. The hand pump creaked and protested, but it worked. Mikey filled a bucket and began cleaning the house, starting with the main room. Each object he discovered told a small part of the Murphy family's story. Photographs of a grey-bearded man next to a woman with a gentle smile, wooden toys that had belonged to children whose laughter had long since fallen silent. It was while cleaning the fireplace that he found something peculiar. Among the cold ashes, his fingers touched something hard and metallic. He dug carefully and pulled out a small silver medallion, blackened by smoke but still intact. When she rubbed it against her shirt, she revealed a delicate engraving, a rose intertwined with thorns, and the initials EM engraved on the back. The locket weighed more than it should for its size, and Mikey felt a strange sense of familiarity as she held it up to the light. There was something about that piece that stirred memories that he couldn't fully identify, fragments of faces and voices that seemed to come from far away, from a time before he arrived in that place. For the rest of the morning, he continued exploring the property. The stable revealed farm tools in good condition and some leather harnesses that just needed oil to be useful again. There was also a wagon with a broken wheel, but it could be repaired with some effort. At the back of the stable, partially hidden under old hay, he found a locked wooden box. The box wasn't big, but it was solid and well built, made of dark oak with bronze hinges that had stood the test of time. There was no key, but the lock seemed simple enough to be forced. Mikey took the box home and placed it on the kitchen table, where the morning light would allow for more careful examination. Before trying to open the box, he decided to take a break for breakfast. He had brought some provisions in his suitcase: coffee, dried beans, a piece of salted bacon, and hard biscuits that could last for weeks if needed. As he prepared the simple meal, his eyes constantly returned to the mysterious box. The coffee was simmering over the fire he had lit in the fireplace when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. Mikey went to the window and saw a man riding a chestnut horse stopping in the courtyard. The visitor was tall and thin, with grey hair under a wide-brimmed hat and a face scarred by the elements. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose bones knew well the weight of the years. Mikey went out to meet him on the porch. The man approached slowly, his spurs tin-tinting softly with each step. When they were face to face, the visitor took off his hat and held it to his chest in an ancient show of courtesy. The man introduced himself as Samuel Peterson, owner of the neighboring ranch to the north. His blue eyes studied Mikey with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond the surface, as if trying to read the secrets written in a stranger's soul. There was a caution in his posture, a subtle tension that suggested that his visit was not merely social. Peterson explained that he had seen smoke coming from the chimney of the Murphy Ranch and had come to investigate. Her words were carefully chosen, but Mikey noticed an undercurrent of anxiety in her voice. The man constantly looked around, as if he expected to see something that shouldn't be there, or perhaps as if he feared he wouldn't see something that should be. During the conversation, Peterson mentioned that he had known the Murphy family well. They were good people, honest workers who had come to the valley full of hope and dreams of thriving in the rough land. But then came the drought, and with it, things he preferred not to discuss. His words became vaguer as the subject approached the family's disappearance. Mike noticed that Peterson was avoiding looking directly at the house, especially at the second-floor windows. There was something about his behavior that suggested knowledge of secrets that weighed down his conscience like stones in a bag. When Maker asked directly about what had happened to the Murphys, the older man was silent for a long moment. Finally, Peterson said only that some things were best left buried. He advised Make to be cautious, especially during moonless nights, and to pay attention to the signs the earth could show him. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the house and shook his head sadly, as if mourning a loss that still hurt after all those years. After Peterson was gone, Mikey returned to the kitchen to find her coffee cold and forgotten. The visit had left more questions than answers, and the feeling that he had bought more than just land and buildings. He had also inherited a mystery that the neighbors preferred to keep buried. He took a sturdy knife and carefully forced the lock on the wooden box. With a gentle click, the lid opened, revealing contents that would make your heart beat faster. Inside, neatly wrapped in red velvet, were yellowed documents, more photographs, and something that glistened in the light of the window, nuggets of pure gold, small but unmistakable. Beneath the nuggets was a leather-bound diary, pages filled with delicate feminine handwriting. The first entry was dated 10 years ago, just 2 weeks before the Murphy family disappeared, and the first words Mikey read made her breathing ragged. "The earth is whispering again. Edward says it's just the desert winds, but I know there's something more, something that comes from below, something that wants to be found." Mikey turned the pages of the diary with trembling fingers, each entry revealing fragments of a truth that was beginning to take shape in her mind, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The woman who had written those words, Emma Murphy, according to the delicate signature at the end of each entry, had documented something extraordinary and terrible at the same time. The first few pages described a normal life of farmers. Emma wrote about the crops, about her 2 young children playing in the courtyard, about the plans she and Edward had to expand the herd. But as the weeks passed, the tone of the entries began to change. She began to mention strange sounds coming from under the earth during the nights, a low hum that seemed to pulsate like a buried heart. Edward had begun to dig a new well behind the stable when the drought came in all its devastating force. The water in the main well was rapidly decreasing, and they needed an alternative source to keep the animals alive. It was during these excavations that he found the first nugget of gold, small and shiny in the red earth. Emma described the family's initial joy. Gold could save them from the financial ruin that drought was bringing. Edward began digging more intensely, working from sunrise to well after sunset, determined to find the source of that unexpected wealth. But the deeper he dug, the stranger the events around the ranch became. The animals began to behave strangely. The horses refused to approach the excavation site, and the cattle crowded into the far corner of the pasture, looking nervously in the direction of the hole that grew day by day. The family dogs, who were once brave guardians, began howling throughout the night and hiding during the day. The most disturbing entry Mike read was dated 3 days before the disappearance. Emma wrote of a night when she had woken up to the sound of voices coming from the yard. When she looked out the window, she saw Edward standing on the edge of the hole, talking to someone she couldn't see. He gesticulated excitedly, as if he were negotiating some kind of deal, but his words were lost in the night wind. When she confronted her husband the next morning, Edward denied any nightly conversation. His eyes had a distant expression that Emma had never seen before, and he spoke obsessively about the need to keep digging. He said he was close to something big, something that would change their lives forever. But there was a quality to her voice that made Emma feel deeply uneasy. The last diary entry was dated the morning of the disappearance. Emma wrote only a few hurried lines. Edward took the children to see what he found. He says it's beautiful, that it shines like diamonds in the dark. I'll follow them in a few minutes. If something happens, may God forgive our greedy souls. Mikey closed the journal and leaned back in her chair, feeling a strange weight in her chest. The sun was already high in the sky, but the kitchen seemed to have gotten colder since he started reading. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the gold nuggets, and he wondered if those small pieces of metal were worth the lives they had apparently cost. He carefully put the diary and nuggets in the box and decided he needed to find the spot where Edward had been digging. Emma's description indicated that it was behind the stable and should not be difficult to locate. Mikey grabbed a shovel from the stable and went out into the yard, his eyes searching for signs of land that had been disturbed. It didn't take long to find the place. Behind the stable, partially hidden by bushes that had grown during the 10 years of abandonment, was a circular depression in the ground. The earth there was a slightly different color from the rest of the yard, darker and more compact, as if it had been dug up and then covered again. Mikey began to dig carefully, removing layer after layer of hardened earth. The work was hard under the midday sun, and soon his face was covered with sweat and dust. But he kept going, driven by a curiosity that was stronger than his caution. 2 feet deep, his shovel hit something solid. The sound was different. Not the dry noise of metal against stone, but something hollow and resonant. Mikey cleaned the surrounding earth with her hands and revealed a smooth, dark surface that reflected sunlight like a black mirror. It was an opening in the earth, perfectly circular and seemingly natural. The edges were smooth as polished glass, and when Mikey threw a small stone inside, the sound echoed out much longer than it should, as if the hole was much deeper than seemed possible. A cold breeze rose from the opening, carrying a strange metallic smell that made his nostrils sting. He leaned over the edge and tried to see the bottom, but the darkness below was absolute. Even with the sun directly overhead, the light seemed to be absorbed by the opening, without illuminating anything that was in the depths. It was like looking at a well that led to the center of the earth, or perhaps somewhere even farther away. Mikey lit a match and threw it into the hole. The flame slowly descended, swirling and dancing in the cold air, rising from the depths. For a moment, he thought he saw something glowing on the walls of the tunnel, small, golden particles that reflected the light of the flame. But before he could be sure, the match went out, and the darkness was complete again. For the rest of the afternoon, Mikey sat on the edge of the opening, trying to make sense of what he had found. The gold nuggets in Emma's diary made sense now. Edward had found a natural vein, or perhaps something even rarer. But there was something about that place that didn't feel right, something that went beyond simple mining. The wind rising from the hole never stopped, and carried strange sounds, distant echoes that could just be air moving through underground caverns. but which sometimes seemed vaguely human. Mikey tried to convince herself that they were just illusions created by her overstimulated imagination, but there were times when she swore she heard voices whispering her name. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of blood red, Mikey decided to cover the opening again. There was something deeply disturbing about leaving that hole exposed overnight. He pushed dirt and rocks over the smooth surface until the opening was completely hidden, but even then he could feel a subtle vibration through the ground, as if something below was breathing. That night, Mike dined in the kitchen with Emma's diary open next to her, rereading the passages about the Murphy family's last days. The gold nuggets were scattered on the table, glowing in the light of the lamp he had lit when darkness came. There was beauty in those little pieces of metal, but there was also something sinister, as if they carried with them the memory of unsolved tragedies. He was about to go to sleep when he heard the first sound. A low, rhythmic noise came from outside, from the backyard, as if someone were digging. Mikey took the lamp and went to the window, but the circle of light was too small to show anything more than a few yards of empty dirt. The sound continued throughout the night, stopping only when the first ray of sunlight touched the horizon. And when Mikey went out to check in the morning, she found the earth over the opening removed and stacked neatly next to the hole, as if invisible hands had worked patiently through the dark hours to reveal again access to the mysterious depths of the earth. Mikey stood motionless before the uncovered opening, watching the darkness that seemed to pulsate like an open wound in the earth. The morning sun bathed the entire yard, but no ray of light could penetrate that deep hole. It was as if the very nature of the opening rejected the light, keeping its secrets protected by a darkness that defied any rational explanation. For 3 days he tried to ignore the opening. He covered it again with dirt and stones, this time adding heavy planks from the stable on top. But every morning he found everything removed with a precision that bordered on the impossible. There were no tool marks, there were no footprints around the site. It was as if the earth itself conspired to keep that portal open. On the 4th morning, Mikey made a decision that would change everything. He had spent the whole night listening to the whispers that came from the depths, voices that called his name with a disturbing sweetness. Among them, he had recognized a female voice that could be that of Emma Murphy, begging for someone to come and help them. The compassion that had always guided his most important decisions spoke louder than prudence. He prepared a strong rope, tying one end to the most solid pole in the stable and testing its strength several times. In his backpack he put an extra lamp, protected matches in a glass jar, water, and some food. If the Murphy family was down there, in need of help after all those years, he couldn't just ignore their pleas. The descent began when the sun was at the highest point in the sky. Mikey tied the rope around her waist and began to slowly lower herself through the opening. The walls of the tunnel were perfectly smooth, as if they had been polished by expert hands. Small, golden veins ran across the dark surface, creating patterns that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. After descending for more than 50 feet, his feet finally touched solid ground. He lit the lamp and found himself in a natural cave of impressive dimensions. The ceiling was lost in the darkness above, and tunnels branched off in various directions, disappearing into the shadows like hungry mouths, waiting to devour anyone who ventured through them. What caught his attention the most were the walls. They were covered with veins of pure gold, more abundant than anything he had seen or imagined. The precious metal formed intricate patterns that seemed to tell an ancient story, images that moved in the dancing light of the lamp. There was enough wealth there to buy an entire city, but something about the way the gold glittered made Mikey feel deeply uneasy. He followed the main tunnel, calling out to the Murphys in a low voice. His voice echoed through the underground galleries, returning to him distorted and strange. After walking for almost an hour, he saw a faint light in the distance. His heart raced with the hope of finally finding the people he had come to rescue. The light came from a large chamber where torches burned on stone supports. In the center of the room was a black stone table, and around it were 4 motionless figures. Mikey approached slowly, her lamp shaking in her hands. When he could finally see clearly, a scream stuck in his throat. Edward Murphy was sitting in a stone chair, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. By her side, Emma held one of the children in her lap, while the other was leaning against her leg. Everyone was perfectly preserved, as if they had just sat there, but their eyes had a golden glow that was not human. When Maker moved, all 4 turned their heads in her direction at the same time, with mechanical and synchronized movements. Edward opened his mouth and spoke, but his voice had a metallic echo that made Make's bones flutter. He explained that they had found something wonderful in that cave, something that had offered eternal wealth in exchange for permanent companionship. The gold on the walls wasn't just precious metal. It was part of something alive, something that had waited patiently in the depths of the earth for someone greedy enough to make a deal. Emma stood up with stiff movements, still holding the child who was neither blinking nor breathing. She said that they had tried to leave several times during the first few years, but the entity that inhabited the gold would not allow it. They were part of it now, eternal guardians of its wealth, and anyone who descended into those depths would be invited to join the family that never grew old or died. Mikey retreated slowly, finally understanding why no farmer talked about this place. It wasn't just fear or superstition, it was a tacit agreement to protect others from a temptation that cost more than any wealth could be worth. The voices he had heard were not cries for help, but invitations to join an existence that was neither life nor death. Edward rose from his chair and began to approach, his hands outstretched in an offering that glittered with liquid gold. He promised that Mikey would never have to worry about money again, never go hungry or cold again. All he had to do was touch the living gold that flowed through the walls and accept to become part of something greater and eternal. For a moment, Mikey hesitated. Life had been hard for him, full of difficult choices and painful losses. The offer of eternal security was tempting, especially coming from people who seemed genuinely satisfied with their situation. But then he looked into the Murphy children's eyes and saw something that made him make his final decision. There was sadness there, a deep melancholy that not even the golden glow could completely hide. Those children had lost their childhoods, their chances to grow up and discover who they could become. They were trapped in an existence that offered everything except the most precious thing, the freedom to choose their own destiny. Mikey turned and ran toward the rope, ignoring the urgent calls behind him. Edward shouted that he was making a terrible mistake, that the surface only offered suffering and death, while the depths offered eternal peace. But Mikey kept running, her lamp casting dancing shadows on the gold-covered walls. The climb back to the surface was the hardest of his life. His hands bled against the rough rope, and his lungs burned from the effort. Behind him he could hear sounds of chase. Not footsteps, but something like the dragging of metal against stone. When it finally emerged from the vent and rolled over the dry land of the backyard, the sun had never looked so bright or so welcome. He wasted no time. He took all his belongings, including Emma's diary and the gold nuggets, and set out from Murphy's ranch before the sun went down. In the city, he sought out Samuel Peterson and told him everything he had discovered. The older man listened in silence, shaking his head sadly as Mikey finished her story. Peterson revealed that there had been suspicions about that place for a long time, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. Several people had bought the ranch over the years, always for ridiculously low prices, but they all eventually disappeared or left overnight, talking about golden dreams they couldn't forget. Mikey left the gold nuggets with Peterson, asking him to sell them and use the money to put up a strong fence around the entire property, with clear warnings about the dangers that awaited anyone trying to exploit the land. He himself didn't want to touch that gold ever again, knowing that each nugget carried with it a little of the curse that had consumed the Murphy family. Before leaving town, Make wrote a detailed letter about her experiences and left it with the bank, along with instructions for it to be attached to the ranch deed. Anyone trying to buy that property in the future would know exactly what they were dealing with. He took the first train that left Red Canyon and never returned to that region. But sometimes, during moonless nights, he could still hear distant echoes of golden voices calling his name, reminding him of the eternal wealth he had chosen to leave behind. And on each of those nights, he felt grateful that he had made the right choice, the choice to value freedom more than any treasure the earth could offer. The Murphy Ranch remained empty thereafter, surrounded and marked with warnings that few dared to ignore. And on quieter nights, Red Canyon residents could still hear strange sounds coming from that direction. Not cries of despair, but something that sounded vaguely like golden laughter echoing from the depths of the earth, waiting patiently for the next greedy traveler who discovered that some prices were too low to be true. If you like this Wild West story, please like and subscribe to the channel for more epic cowboy narratives, mysteries, and desert adventures.